Gaudete, Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where I, Ivar Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and often hasn't heard about. And today it is my turn. And what I want to do is, I guess I'll begin by asking a question, Stilgar. So, do you know about the plagues of Exodus, right? The plagues that Moses struck Egypt with?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what time period or what dynasty do you think that occurred during?
Oh, I have no idea. You tell me.
What you have any idea what the pharaoh was during that time? Who the pharaoh was?
No, I probably should know, but I don't. Sorry.
Well, it's okay that you don't know because actually most people don't. And it's hard to be completely certain, but I do believe that we can be within the ballpark of it. And so this is actually going to be a two-part topic. So for the first part, I want to talk about the plagues of Egypt and what evidence there is for them in the Egyptian records and around when they occurred. And then the second part of this topic, which I'll get to whenever I get to it, is going to be about which dynasty Moses was born into, and then which one was kind of shut down by him, and what the evidence for it is, and who Moses and the pharaohs would be in the Egyptian records. So there's a lot of misunderstanding around this topic, and most people think there's no evidence at all for this stuff, but there actually is. I'm going to go over it. And
Cool.
there are some movies that came out, like a lot of people think that the pharaoh is Ramses II, Ramses the Great, because in that Ten Commandments movie with Charlton Heston, they use Ramses as the pharaoh of Egypt. And also that animated movie Prince of Egypt, they use him again. Of course, in real life, Ramses, he was the most popular pharaoh in Egyptian history. And he didn't die of an unnatural cause. He lived to be very old, like 90 something. He had lots of wives and was a very successful pharaoh, very beloved. And when he died, people thought that the world was going to end because he'd been around for so long, and he outlived some of his children that were supposed to be the heirs. And to this day, you still have Egyptians naming their kids Ramses in honor of this guy. So it wasn't this guy. Oh yeah, in the Coptic community, they still use Ramses as baby name.
Really?
Not
Okay.
Oh yeah, not very often. That's how popular he was. And then there were other pharaohs named Ramses because they were hoping to kind of bring back the greatness. But I'm not going to talk about him. This entry isn't about him. I guess I did talk about him. Well, eventually I want to go over his life, but that'll be later. So for now, what I want to do is let's come to this event which happened well before him. And maybe later on we can give more reasons why he's not the guy. So before I come to the Egyptian record, I just want to run through a list of the plagues of Egypt, what they were, because maybe our whole audience is not familiar. And maybe those of us who were taught this stuff as a kid don't remember off the tops of our heads either. But the first plague was the plague of blood, where the rivers turned to blood, the Nile River. Then the plague of frogs. Then the plague of gnats. The plague of flies comes next. Then the death of livestock, where the cattle just died. And then the sixth plague is boils. The seventh is hail. The eighth is locusts. The ninth plague is darkness. And the 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. So I'll put a thing in the slideshow where everybody can see these listed out and where to look them up, where to look up the description. So as a kid, I wondered where this shows up in the Egyptian records, because if something like this happened, the Egyptians should have also written it down, especially since they were a very meticulous culture for keeping records. Like keeping records was their big thing. Of course, and the Greeks used to go there in order to crawl through their libraries. That's what drew them there initially. Solon went there, and supposedly that's where he got the legend of Atlantis from. But at any rate, most people don't know about this record because they're looking in the wrong place. But there's a papyrus called the Ipuwer Papyrus, also known as the Admonitions of Ipuwer. And Ipuwer was believed to have lived during the late Middle Kingdom or the Second Intermediate period. And the text that he wrote is dated to no earlier than the 12th dynasty, but it could have also been during the 13th dynasty. So they set the 12th dynasty as like the earliest possible point in which this could have been written. However, there was no catastrophe like this that occurred during the 12th dynasty. So let's keep going. So the Hyksos invasion occurs during the Second Intermediate period, which is right after the 13th dynasty. The 13th dynasty was a very short-lived dynasty, which didn't last very long. And then these barbarians came in from the Middle East and took over Egypt. And for a while, they were ruled by foreigners called the Hyksos. The Ipuwer Papyrus describes post-apocalyptic conditions. I mean, you think about like sci-fi movies, which I know we both like, and something strikes the earth and people are crawling out from the ruins and it's a great catastrophe like Fallout or something like that. So the Ipuwer Papyrus is kind of like that. It describes those kind of conditions. So it includes a reversal of fortunes for the wealthy Egyptians and the skilled workers. And it involves servants rebelling and some sort of mass foreign invasion. It talks about the royal granaries being looted. But interestingly, or at least to me it's interesting, the royal palace is intact. It's not destroyed by this barbarism. So I'm not going to read the whole Ipuwer Papyrus, but I'm going to read a bit of it. And I'll put some links down in the description if anybody wants to go read the whole thing for themselves. Very easy to do so. And you can also download a PDF version of it, which I've done. I also have a hard copy version of it too. So here, I'm going to read some of it. And you tell me what you think, Stilgar. Indeed, poor men have become owners of wealth, and he who could not make sandals for himself is now a possessor of riches. Indeed, men's slaves, their hearts are sad, and magistrates do not fraternize with their people when they shout. Indeed, hearts are violent, pestilences throughout the land, blood is everywhere, death is not lacking, and the mummy cloth speaks even before one comes near it. Indeed, many dead are buried in the river, the stream is a sepulchre, and the place of embalmment has become a stream. Indeed, noble men are in distress, while the poor man is full of joy. Every town says, let us suppress the powerful among us. Indeed, men are like ibises. Squalor is throughout the land, and there are none indeed whose clothes are white in these times. Indeed, the land turns around as does a potter's wheel. The robber is a possessor of riches, and the rich man is become a plunderer. Indeed, trusty servants are blank. The poor man complains, how terrible, what am I to do? So parts of this text did not survive. So there'll be some blank spots. Indeed, the river is blood, yet men drink of it. Men shrink from human beings and thirst after water. Indeed, gates, columns, and walls are burnt up, while the hall of the palace stands firm and endures. Indeed, the ship of southerners has broken up. Towns are destroyed, and Upper Egypt has become an empty waste. Indeed, crocodiles are glutted with the fish they have taken, for men go to them of their own accord. It is the destruction of the land. Men say, do not walk here. Behold, it is a net. Behold, men tread the water like fishes, and the frightened man cannot distinguish it because of terror. Indeed, men are few, and he who places his brother in the ground is everywhere. When the wise man speaks, he flees without delay. Indeed, the well-born man blank through lack of recognition, and the child of his lady has become the son of his maidservant. So I'm going to keep going. This is the next section here. Before I go on, do you have any comments on that?
Sounds pretty desperate.
It does.
Yeah.
I'm sure you noticed the part about the river being turned to blood, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the first plague. Well, I'll say some more. I want to read the next part here. Indeed, the desert is throughout the land. The gnomes are laid waste, and barbarians from abroad have come to Egypt. Indeed, men arrive blank, and indeed, there are no Egyptians anywhere. Indeed, gold and lapis lazuli, silver and turquoise, carnelian and amethyst, ibit stone, and are strung on the necks of maid servants. That's important, Stilgar. Remember that. Good things are throughout the land, yet housewives say, "Oh, that we had something to eat." Indeed, noble women, their bodies are in sad plight by reason of their rags, and their hearts sink when greeting one another. Indeed, chests of ebony are broken up, and precious sedum wood is cleft asunder in beds. Indeed, the builders of pyramids have become cultivators, and those who were in the sacred bark are now yoked to it. None shall indeed sail northward to Byblos today. What shall we do for cedar trees for our mummies, and with the produce of which priests are buried, and with the oil of which chiefs are embalmed as far as Keftiu? They come no more. Gold is lacking, and materials for every kind of craft have come to an end. The blank of the palace is despoiled. How often do people of the oases come with their festival spices, mats, and skins, with fresh redoubt plants, grease of birds? Indeed, elephantine and thinnest blank of Upper Egypt, but without paying taxes owing to civil strife, lacking our grain, charcoal, iritu fruit, mumu wood, Nuit wood, and brushwood. If anybody's wondering about these garbled up words, the Egyptian text prior to the adoption of the Greek alphabet had no vowels in it, like a lot of Afro-Asiatic languages. So whenever they translated these words that they don't really, I guess there's no English equivalents of these words, or the English equivalents are not known. So they just phonetically wrote the Egyptian letters, and I have no idea how to pronounce them. So that's why that's what I'm doing there for those. The work of craftsmen and blank are the profit of the palace. To what purpose is a treasury without its revenues? Happy indeed is the heart of the king when truth comes to him, and every foreign land comes. That is our fate, and that is our happiness. What can we do about it? All is ruin. Indeed, laughter is perished and is no longer made. It is groaning that is throughout the land, mingled with complaints. All right, so a couple of things here are pretty significant. So obviously, you caught the part about the river being turned to blood. And
Yeah.
another thing that's important is they mention that the plants are decimated, right? So that is what we would expect if we had hail and locusts. The plants are decimated. They're destroyed,
Mhm.
the trees, the crops. And so the people are looting the granaries. And then the part here about the noble women don't have anything nice to wear. They have no jewelry. People are dressed in poor clothes, and the chests of jewelry have been opened. So Stilgar, if you recall, what did the Israelites do before they left Egypt? They plundered the Egyptians, right? They were told, ask of them, ask your Egyptian neighbors for clothes and jewels, and they took all that stuff from them before they left.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can also notice parts here, they're talking about the dead are everywhere. So the last plague was the dead of the firstborn. And there's another part of the papyrus. It mentions that the dead of the commoners and the wealthy are so numerous that the bodies are just being thrown against the walls and stacked up there, including the bodies of the children. And they're not getting a proper burial for two reasons. One is because a lot of the embalmers themselves are dead. And another is because the supplies that they need to make to do the mummification properly are in short supply. And that has to do with the trees and things being destroyed, certain plants that they would use to in the process of embalming. And there's just so many. It's like a severe case of triage that they can't possibly keep up with it. They also mention somewhere in here about the animals being dead, so that Khnum is constantly churning. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'll come to that here a little further. All right. So this is coming from section 4. Indeed, hair has fallen out for everybody, and the man of rank can no longer be distinguished from him who is nobody. Indeed, the children of princes are dashed against walls, and the children of the neck are laid out on the high ground. So when I read this, I was like, okay, what are they talking about? What is children of the neck? So children of the neck is an allusion, I guess, or it's their colloquial way of talking about people from poor and people that are, so the wealthy, the children of the wealthy would be carried on litters. The children of the poor, they just hang on to their parents, and you carry your kid as you go. So that's what they mean by children of the neck, the kids that hang on to you as you're walking, you know, like my youngest still does with me. So like still our kids, I guess, would be children of the neck if we were alive back then. So indeed, those who were in the place of embalmment are laid out on the high ground, and the secrets of the embalmers are thrown down because of it. Children, okay, yeah. As for the butler, he is ruined. There are no remedies for it. Noble women suffer like maidservants. Minstrels are at the looms without the weaving rooms, and they that sing to the songstress goddess, and what they sing to the songstress goddess is mourning. Talkers, blank, corn rubbers. Corn, okay, so corn is wheat whenever you read these ancient texts. It's not what we mean in modern colloquial American English by corn. Same if you're reading like the King James Bible or any medieval literature. You see the word corn, it means wheat back then. So talkers, and this part is blanked out. I guess it has to do with people that give recitations are now sorting the wheat. So what you can see here is the middle class that these people would have. You know, it's not like the kind of modern middle class that we have in the United States, although that's going away. It's like skilled labor, you know, musicians, people that create artwork, artisans, craftsmen, people that engage in song and recitation. This is the middle class, the skilled workers and the entertainers. So these people are being demoted down to menial labor and food production. And that also goes for office workers too, which is mentioned elsewhere in the papyrus.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. If there's a shortage of food, then you only have people like that, like artisans or, people that, poets, people that sing or write, or people,
So, hey, you just went
everybody's
silent.
dying.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, if you don't have any surplus and people are dying, then there's no extra food for those people. They would have to try to survive somehow. And of course, they have no skills, so it would be extra hard on them.
Also, that's right. But also, what happens if you lose all your menial laborers? Those menial tasks don't just go away. Somebody else is going to
You'd have to do it yourself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we see happening here. And it's not just the skilled workers, but it's also the nobles that are now participating in the menial labor. So indeed, all female slaves are free with their tongues, And when their mistress speaks, it is irksome to the maidservants. Indeed, trees are felled and branches are stripped off. That's again, what could do that, Stilgar? Plague of hail, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
and then here we mention, indeed the hair has fallen for everybody. I've seen another translation of this where they rendered it as every head is shaved. So of course,
But is that out of mourning or something?
well, a
Or
lot of cultures would shave their heads in mourning. In India, they still do that in some places, but also it could be a way of dealing with lice too, right?
yeah,
That's a good
no, and,
way of.
and you would get more lice if you're unhealthy, if you're malnourished, and yeah,
Lice was one
and
of the
sick.
plagues.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, and then here I'll read this one more place and then I'll stop. Indeed, all
Okay.
animals, their hearts weep. Cattle moan because of the state of the land. Indeed, the children of princes are dashed against walls, and the children of the neck are laid out on the high ground. Khnum groans because of his weariness. So,
What does it mean to be dashed against the walls?
they're just tossing the bodies up against the sides of buildings. They're stacking them until they can figure out what to do.
Okay, they're not like killing people that way, right?
Nah, they're already
Okay,
dead. They're just
okay.
tossing bodies, which, again, that's the last plague. Every household of the Egyptians lost somebody, young
Yeah.
and old. So then, so I read this and I said, what is Khnum? Because it says Khnum it groans because of his weariness. So Khnum was the god of the source of the Nile. And
Ah,
they have multiple gods associated with the Nile, like Sobek is another one, and Happy is another one, and also Khnum apparently. Um, but he's thought to form children, and he's associated with fertility and water. And I saw supposedly he's also associated with animals. So basically, Khnum is trying to repair this damage by quickly churning out the next crop of people to restore the population. So again, I thought that was interesting. You can go and read the whole papyrus yourself, which I did. But you can see a few things in there, like the river is turned to blood and the foliage is decimated and there's massive death, so much that they're having to stack up the babies. And somebody has loot and pillaged, well, not just babies, I mean, everybody, stacking up the bodies. And the nobles, they no longer have nice clothes and jewelry. All this stuff has been taken from them, which, in Exodus, that's what the Israelites did before they left. They took the clothes and jewelry, and people were glad to have them gone because the land was getting so wrecked. It's like, here, take it and go kind of thing.
yeah.
So, I mean, it looks like to me this is a record of the plagues of Exodus, but the focus is more on the aftermath of it. But it also talks about two things: is the servants mouthing off, and then another group of foreigners has come in and filled the land. And it talks about people that used to sleep on the ground and live in tents are now sleeping in the palaces. So I believe that this is a reference to the Hyksos invasion, and I believe that the Hyksos were able to come in because of these disasters, and also because a lot of the army had been decimated, drowned in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So these people took advantage of it basically. And you see like people rushing to fill the vacancies in food production and pillaging the granaries. Um, so it looks like that's what it's talking about. I mean, it doesn't point by point reiterate all the plagues, but this is the kind of effects that we would expect from it. And some of the things are mentioned directly, like the people being stripped of their jewelry and their nice clothes, and the river turning to blood, of course, and then the mass death. So, again, the link will be down there for anyone who wants to read it. You can see that I'm not just making this stuff up. So, one more piece of evidence that I want to go over, and this is evidence of slaves in Egypt. Now, years ago, when I was in middle school, I saw some something on there was like a special that came on TV where they were interviewing Zahi Hawass. I don't know if he's still the head of the Egyptian antiquities, but back then they were interviewing him, and one of the things he said is that we never had slaves. There's no evidence of that at all. And it's kind of, it's kind of interesting that anybody would say that, because if any civilization has been around, and even if any, and it's even more so among barbaric tribes that are not civilized, but if any culture, let's just say that, if any culture has been around for any length of time, at some point in their existence, they did practice slavery. I mean, like today, they like to do all kinds of moral grandstanding about slavery for political reasons, but the truth is, every single culture in the world had the institution of slavery at some point in time, owned slaves, and some of them still do today. So I thought that was kind of interesting that he would say that, but there is evidence of slavery in Egypt, and there's evidence of Hebrew slavery in Egypt. So there's a document called the Brooklyn Papyrus 35.1446, which was found by Charles Edwin Wilbauer, and it contains a list of slaves. And most of these slaves are Semitic, people with Middle Eastern names. And according to I couldn't get, by the way, unfortunately, I could not get a copy of this papyrus. But what I'm going to do is read a quote from the Brooklyn Museum. And what they say is this: the most important text recounts the efforts of a 13th dynasty Theban noblewoman named Senebtisi to establish legal ownership of 95 household servants, whose names indicate that 45 were of Asiatic origin. The presence of so many foreigners in a single household suggests that the Asiatic population was increasing rapidly in the 13th dynasty Egypt. And further down, they say, some of these foreigners facilitated the collapse of the Middle Kingdom and the later conquest of Egypt by the Asiatic Hyksos in the Second Intermediate Period. So the Brooklyn Museum attributes the collapse leading to the Hyksos conquest to the presence of foreigners who were already there. Now, what's interesting is that the names on this list, some of them are straight Hebrew names, like what you find in the Old Testament. The name Shiphrah is mentioned there. Now, in Exodus, it mentions the Hebrew midwives, that wouldn't kill the Hebrew babies when the Pharaoh had ordered them to kill them if they were a boy upon birth. And one of those women's name was Shiphrah. Now, I doubt that this is the same Shiphrah. It's probably just a baby name that was in their culture. Obviously, there'd be more than one. But basically, it adds a little. So this is evidence that there was Shemitic slaves being held in Egypt prior to the Second Intermediate Period, where the 13th dynasty collapsed and the Hyksos came in. And here you have some with Hebrew names like Shiphrah. So I mean, if I'm looking at it, even if you're an atheist and you think the Bible is fake, you don't believe in God, then I would have to say that it looks like this event at least occurred. The Israelites, even if you don't believe in the supernatural stuff, the Israelites were there in Egypt. So you can say that, I don't think that it's like infallible and completely true, but at least we know that this is called corroboration, where you have one account which is in the Bible, and here is a second account from a hostile source which corroborates what is there. And this Brooklyn Papyrus is dated to the rule of Sobek-Hotep, who is a pharaoh in the 13th dynasty. So, any questions, Stilgar?
No.
Questions? Thoughts?
Well, I wanted to know, I wanted to ask, around what year was the 13th dynasty?
So the 13th dynasty supposedly 1803 BC to 1649 BC.
Okay.
Now, the thing is, when you're talking about some of these, this is not the Old Kingdom, but like Old and Middle Kingdom Egypt, there's a margin of error, and there's a mismatch between the timeline that you get from the Bible, from Exodus and Genesis, and the timeline that's been constructed for Egypt. Now, of course, I'm a Christian, so my bias is towards what the Bible says. But the Egyptian timeline is not perfect, and it's based on some assumptions of when these pharaohs actually ruled. And, a lot of it comes from lists produced by Manetho, who lived way after the fact. There's some debate over the veracity of the official timeline, which is not 100%, proven. And it's based on some assumptions, like whether or not maybe these people ruled consecutively or simultaneously. Because if they're simultaneous, then that's less time. That's a shorter timeline than if they're consecutive. So hopefully that makes sense. But I can see that it's something that we're going to have to deal with. So when we come to part 2, I'll give some more clarity on why there's a discrepancy and what an adjusted timeline might look like. But yeah, this is the evidence in the Egyptian record. Here we have something. So we have a ballpark area. We know that there was Hebrew slaves at least during the 13th dynasty before the Hyksos came in. And it's interesting because, when I was a kid, I always assumed that the Israelite slaves were owned by the state, the pharaoh. Like they're owned by the government. The government deploys them where they want them to be. But here you have a private citizen who's got 45 of them. So it kind of sheds some light, like on why Pharaoh didn't want to let them go. Because here in the United States, we also had slavery. And the slavery here that we had was privatized. It was all private citizens, to my knowledge. I haven't heard of any incidents of them being property of the state, but it was private citizens. So the slavery was abolished more quickly and easily in the North because there was a lot less of it. And it was easy, like they'd do different things, like they'd make it illegal, but then they'd have the government buy out, like they'd compensate the slave owners that are there. But in the South, the slave owners had a lot more power and influence and a lot of slaves because it was based on that kind of agrarian economy of mass production of, I guess you could say, raw materials, cotton, indigo, tobacco. So it's a different matter when you have private slavery than when you have state slavery. So it looks like the situation that the Israelites were in Egypt was kind of similar to the situation that the African Americans were in this country, at least in the South. And it used to be that the black community here in the United States was very religious, very zealous, and they often identified with the Israelites for being in a similar situation that they themselves were in. Of course, these days that's not really the case anymore for the most part. And then you also have those Afrocentric type people that think that the Israelites were black. They're like, oh, they were in the situation that we were in, so they must be exactly the same as us in every way, or whatever their logic is, which is skewed logic. But so if at least like half of the slaves, or maybe not even half, let's say 10% of them, or we don't know what the actual breakdown was, but if a lot of them were privately owned, it would make sense that the pharaoh would be so stubborn, because he can, if he's going to free the slaves that are privately owned, he can use force, or he can buy them out, using tax money, because government doesn't create wealth. That they get all their wealth from taxes. Well, I guess from looting and plundering other countries in the ancient world, but basically it's going to come out of the treasury. or so he can free them by compensating the private individuals, or he can free them without compensating the private individuals. Either way, he's going to suffer, and that might be the end of his dynasty. And it looks like that was the end of his dynasty. And he just used force, like, okay, I'm freeing all the Israelites. Somebody probably would have put a knife in his back. So this guy was pretty much in a lose-lose scenario. Like, no matter what he did, if he complied right away with Moses, he is going to lose. That's going to be the end of him. Or if he waited it out till the end, like he almost did, then that would be the end of him too, because the country was getting destroyed. So there really was like no good options for this guy. Like, he was going to lose out no matter what he did.
There was a better option, though.
Yeah, there's a better option. He kind of learned the hard way and ended up dying for it. But yeah, at any rate, that's all I got on this. When we come to the next one, I'll talk about, the identity of Moses and the Pharaoh. And there's some good documents for this as well. But yeah, that's all I've got. Any questions or concerns?
No, I'm eager to learn more about the Pharaoh and who he was, like what he was like. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, good topic. And interesting to find some. I think there's more and more evidence popping up that the Bible is actually true. So yeah, I mean, this just adds to it. So
yeah, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this, now I don't intend to just make this an apologetics channel, and I definitely don't intend to sit on any one thing for too terribly long, but one of the reasons I wanted to do this was because years ago, before we started this channel or right when we started this channel, I have my own channel elsewhere that I just use to talk about like mythology and entertainment, like a very small scale thing. And well, I use it to come into live streams for this one as well and speak to people when the video goes live. But I had somebody was an atheist that was saying, there is no evidence for the Bible. And I said, there is, and I can show it to you. And he said, show it to me. And I didn't show it to him, but I had in my mind, like, I'm going to do a video for this guy. And he actually subscribed to my channel to wait for it. But of course, my personal channel, that's not really what it deals with. That was before I had a clear purpose for that other channel. But I thought, man, because I had a friend who was an atheist that asked me for evidence as well. And I said I would make something for her. And then I never did. It was on my list of things to do, but there's a lot of things on my list of things to do, and half of them never get done. But wherever that person is, I didn't forget about him. It just took me like 2 years to getting around to finally sitting down and doing this. So,
there's also a lot of videos around Jesus being a historical person, and as well as the crucifixion, even. So there's a lot of good videos out now that show that there's a lot of historical backing to the Bible. There's of course also the Great Flood, and there's a lot of indications of that as well. But I mean, there's so much out there, and I think that's one of the reasons we're doing this channel. Is not to be apologetic, but I think it's history is written by the victorious, right? So
by the victorious and the strong.
Yes. And we live in an atheist, secular society. So they have rewritten history in a way that is often extremely biased and untrue. And there are so many examples that we've already addressed in our channel, like the so-called coexistence or friendly coexistence that you had in Spain between the Muslims and the Christians. We've addressed the reasons for the Reconquista. we've addressed like other forms of slavery, like white slavery, the Slavs, the Barbary pirates. There's like so many things that the powers that be, like the M5M right now, they don't want you to know about because it doesn't fit in their worldview. You know, they want you to believe that Christianity is something bad and that medieval times were somehow extremely dark. And even though people were building like the most beautiful cathedrals and buildings ever, and that the church was anti-science, even though that without the church there wouldn't be any universities because the first universities were started by the church. And by the way, most of the biggest inventions were actually made by Christians, and oftentimes even people working for the church. But there's like so many examples to go into. So no, I
Yeah,
appreciate this story. So I think it fits our. It fits. It does. It's not apologetic necessarily, but it's just. I think it's a good thing to expose history for what it really is, and not just follow the narrative and be like, like, oh
yeah.
yeah, this never happened. There were never any Jews in Egypt, and because that whatever. Anyway, people
So if
would
you want
much
to
rather
say,
have that. Mm.
yeah, if you want to say now at this point, if you want to say there's no evidence of Jews ever having been enslaved in Egypt, then you have to throw out the evidence that I just gave, these Egyptian records, like this Brooklyn papyrus. And by the way, this isn't the only Brooklyn papyrus. There's like others that are just, posthumously referred to as Brooklyn papyrus, which is why there's a number sequence after it. But yeah, I mean, you now you're in the territory of you got to throw out this as well. And what I'm also thinking now that you mention it, that maybe the reason they want to associate the Exodus with Ramses the Great is to make it look like this is impossible and doesn't fit with history. Because
Yeah.
Ramses the Great was beloved and he built Egypt. He built a ton of stuff there, and he made it a very prosperous country. He was a great pharaoh. Um, he was the original great pharaoh. Like if you just type in great pharaoh, you're gonna get pictures of Ramses II. So I think that's probably a deliberate thing in order to mislead people and make it look like we have no evidence and that we're delusional. When actually there is evidence, you just need to be willing to reject what the establishment has to say. Of course, I don't take the position that something is wrong because the establishment says so. Like that's not free thinking either. That's being just as blinkered as the people who think something is right because the establishment says so. But yeah, there's also a lot of evidence for the flood, which is something I know probably a lot more about that than I do about um, this thing that we just covered today, the plagues of Egypt. But the thing is, before we cover that, before I cover anything, I have to have like all of my information organized and all my ducks in a row. I don't want to even touch it until I've got everything perfectly set up in order. You know, I mean, you know how my brain works. So, but that is something that's in development if anybody's interested. Um, I will come to the flood. That's one of my favorite topics. There's a lot of evidence for that. There's more evidence for that than what I just went over, because that really left a scar on the world. And actually, I've been seeing a lot of articles just coming up in Bing, which talk about like some really weird stuff, but it looks like you know, evidence for the flood. They're finding more evidence, even stuff beneath the crust, and they don't know what it is. They think it took billions of years or whatever, but we'll cover that. I will come to that. That's one of my favorite things. And so, yeah, I guess if that's, I think we let this one go on long enough. So if you don't have anything else, I'll go ahead and close it off. Um, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So,
See you in the next one.
yep.
Deus homo factus est natura mirante, mundus renovatus est a Christo regnante. Gaudete, Christus est natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.